Yeah, honestly, I do wish I knew demotic. Like, it's
I'm just laughing at like I just wish I knew demotic. Like same, I know, but why demotic?
because there's so many texts written
Mm.
in demotic that are still just sitting there in archives. I mean, the problem is, right, there's not many speakers, well, not many readers and writers of it in general, and then you add in the fact that the majority of sources, what they're going to be, what they're going to be written on papyrus. I start thinking of paleography for that, and I wince and cringe. I'm like, I don't have the time for this. I've got a life to lead. But you know,
Decaying fragments that only burnt in a fire like 1500 years ago just to cook something or some like tu'u.
Mhm.
yeah, honestly, like paleography is a skill that I still lack after many years of trying. So that's off to anyone who can do it. But
Yeah, and unlike like Middle Egyptian and Syriac and these other languages, right? Like Demotic doesn't even have many readers within academia, but it's only a
hmm
handful.
Mm-hmm.
hmm it's insane, yeah. But there's also all these nice astrological texts, and they're just sitting there out of reach. Like,
You're like, no, it's like the grapes that are like getting further away whenever you try and eat them.
yeah, yeah, for real.
Well, that's why
So
I have to learn Arabic.
Faustian bargain for language learning. The grapes will forever be further as you learn more and more languages.
God, I feel that.
I mean, listen, I think we've all done that here.
A little bit.
A little
A
bit.
little bit, yeah, a little bit, a little bit. And so, anyway, Key, you have a good exorcism story for us, don't you?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. So, one of the exorcisms that I've performed in my day as a bit of a wandering nerd.
A
A
Shalamancer, if you will, a wandering black school student. Just
little
a
bit,
little
yes.
bit. It's like coming soon to the Frightful Howls you may hear.
Yeah,
I'm
one,
totally gonna do a Shalaman's episode.
as you should, that would be awesome.
Mm.
That really would.
Um, one foot in the threshold, one foot out, as a true Shallomancer might be. But
Mm.
um, the the story of an exorcism that I have is as I was wandering around the city in which I live one day, I was like, why is this building so unbelievably cursed and evil and haunted? So I went home and Googled the address, and what comes up is the website for a paranormal activity tour
Oh, you know it's
around
good.
haunted locations in the city. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know it's good when you like got a bad vibe while walking around and like passively scrying your surroundings and land spirits. Then we're like, what is that? And then like the thing that you looked at comes up on a haunted tour. Like, why are the vibes so rancid? Like,
Legit. That's I was actually talking to someone about this earlier today, but one of the exercises I used to do to train mediumship is to just wander in the city until I get lost looking at the spirits and then try to find my way back home by asking the spirits, how do I get home?
oh, I do that one too. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's from your advice, I believe,
Oh.
many years ago. So TY for that one.
Mhm.
But yeah, so when I was out doing that, I'm like, this building is evil. Look it up. The Paranormal Activity 7 or whatever it's on is being filmed there. Not actually, but you know what it is.
Mm.
Um, and so the story of this location is that it was a factory in which caustic solutions were made for soap making. And they did a foray into soap making themselves. After it was a soap making factory, it was turned into a field hospital during the First World War. And after it was a hospital, it was an experimental theater that was closed because the actors and actresses in the theater would become increasingly violent and erratic as they performed there for longer and longer periods of time to the point they were attacking audience members and fellow performers.
I'm the
Um,
fucking Swan Queen. Sorry, we're Sigma female posting today.
oh man, as you should, by what shook out of this place. So I dug a little deeper and found that there have been rumors persisting from the late 1800s, early 1900s that the cities, dog catchers, and later the Pound, and later the Humane Society, as ideas around that evolved, would, when they euthanized or otherwise needed to get rid of dogs, would send them to the soap factory to be killed above the vats of lye and then turned into soap. So, yeah, evil location that became a hellhound spawner, which definitely a hellhound black dog mythology episode soon. So, yeah, it became a hellhound spawner. The shadow of the building itself was pumping out evil hounds.
Like vengeful dog ghosts.
Yeah, hateful things that were killed before their time that wanted to take revenge on their killers.
Mm-hmm.
So what ended up happening is I went to some of the deities that I'm closely linked to or otherwise venerate independently, who have those, dog Cathonos attributes to them. Shoutouts to particular forms of Hecate, shoutouts to St. Christopher,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But went over there, took a bunch of spirit traps constructed in various different ways. One of them, notably, is labyrinths drawn on, I think it was 21 different sheets of rice paper put around the building in like an array in a certain order. But goaded the spirit, who is a bunch of dog spirits stitched together in the vats into a hellhound capable of birthing other hellhounds, and wrapped her up in a little labyrinth and said, okay, you're coming with me. Did a very prolonged remediation of that and elevation and exorcism upon the spirit, then installed an array of protector spirits around the building that, fish hounds that still pop into being from the shadows from time to time, out of there, remediate their suffering on my behalf, and install them in the cohorts of either myself or one of many familiars of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the perhaps more sorcerous ending to certain exorcisms, taking the spirits and being like, you work for me now.
It's very, very different from the stereotypical image of the Catholic priest walking into a room and just kicking a spirit outright.
But hey, they took the building off the register of haunted ghost tour places, so
yeah, it's a good way to see that your shit worked. Exorcism complete. I love that story, and I think that sorry to jump in. I just think that one important thing to note there is that, as I'm sure Salt you're going to touch on soon, is it can also not just be removing a spirit from a place, but removing a spirit from a place in a particular hierarchy and putting it under a separate bureaucracy of spirit, intelligences, which is exactly what you did here with your own chord, and well fucking done for that.
Do I. But yeah, that is definitely a maneuver that Salt will indeed lead us back to, because today we are talking about exorcism.
Exorcism in Antiquity. Part of the two, Salt, if I recall correctly, is going to be sort of like early to late Christianity.
Yeah, with a bit of a special focus on both lay exorcism rather than like clerical.
Yeah.
And also in magic as well. You can't have grimoires without exorcism. So we're going to touch on that in part 2. But today, late antiquity is kind of the focus and theme, especially Egypt, but also Babylon, Rome, Greece. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Hell yeah, I'm excited about how you're gonna do this. It's always one of those things with like broad overview episodes where you're just like, how am I gonna, adequately summarize these things without like spending 10 episodes going onto each context? And I think we're in for a treat with you, as we always are.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot being crammed in here, but that's kind of part of the fun of this episode, I think, is just the range at which we're going at it. So
without further ado, I suppose let's head on over.
Be not afraid of the frightful howls you may hear. It's Svinga,
Hello.
Salt,
Yo.
and begone from this place! B key. And, that is the B today in the ever mercurial B of my name.
Oh my god, that was so good. Yes, you don't know how long we tried to figure out what the B was for today. We've committed to it, so we have to do it, right? But like, I was like, oh, it could be like, I don't know, like a Babylonian demon incantation or something, or like we even thought of like, there's this guy we're gonna talk about. His name appears in Exorcism later on, and he has like a very complicated name that begins with many B's. But no, I like the.
Yeah, it works. We can include the troubleshooting of that perhaps as a bonus episode or an excerpt for the patrons of this. But
yeah,
we spent a solid 20 minutes just riffing on B exorcisms.
There's a surprisingly large amount of them,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Benedictine Rosary key. I'll stop But it's Salt's episode. It's another research episode, and this time it's my love. And I'm so excited to hear you talk about this.
Yeah, so today I wanted to talk about one of those subjects that stands out as the most fascinating to me, and honestly it's a real passion of mine, and that is exorcism.
I'm so happy you're doing this, because even as just a part one, I like to have it early on in the podcast. I think it's going to be essential, because it's so, I think, we always talk about how like, okay, religion's hard to define. Okay, well, you think religion's hard to define. What about magic? Okay, you think magic's hard to define. What about witchcraft versus magic? You think of like sorcery. Where is that line? These things. And of course, all these words in English are used as translations of other terms that are deeply culturally encoded within their own perspectives, right? So what counts as magic, is different in each culture. But exorcism, probably even worse than all of them combined, which is saying something.
3,000 years of history, each enveloped in a specific culture, with anthropologists translating other anthropologists who are translating other anthropologists' field interviews to get, into the nitty-gritty of what is actually going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention the social distinction, like who's doing it. Is it sanctioned by the state? Is it laymen? Is it clergy? So there's a lot going on. And I think most of our listeners probably already know that there's a close relationship between the texts that we call grimoires today and the topic of exorcism, for example. There's the liturgical elements of ritual magic that are often drawn upon earlier traditions of especially clerical exorcism, where the ceremonies of the church are being utilized not only for dismissing and expelling spirits, but also commanding and compelling them, to the point that it makes up one of the most important parts of ritual protocol within the vast majority of these texts. Even angels aren't immune to the divine command coming from a human mouth at times, so to speak.
I think probably my favorite example of that was it's a Coptic prayer to Saint Cyprian, preserved in the anthology Ancient Christian Magic. And it literally, like, you do the whole thing where you identify as Cyprian right in the beginning, and like you go through his hagiography, and then it gets into an exorcism. Essentially, it's a love spell, by the way, which is ironic given it's Saint Cyprian, right? And that he himself got clapped by Justina over doing much the same. But he basically repents for this and says, yeah, I know I was a bad boy, but now because of his saintly status, he's able to compel the Archangel Gabriel to force this person to love this other person, depending on who you're doing the spell for. Because the angels are forced to essentially, like, not only do they have no free will, which is common among all, traditions that work with angels to regard them in that way, but also they have to essentially work for the exorcist at this point, or like the ritualist, whatever you want to call them, because they're identifying with Cyprian, and as he is close to God and hears his prayers, he can compel the angel to force love within, between these two people, which I think is just utterly fascinating, right? It's like, it's a little angel exorcism, and that is also a love spell, and a compulsory love spell at that, much as you would see like in those ones of like the little figurines being stabbed by copper pins, from the PGM and so on, and all that, wrapped up in the vignette, if you will, of Saint Cyprian.
You'd think he'd have learned by now, especially considering he is often associated with book learning and such things. But
Hey, it's kind of a flex to bind, the archangel that literally reveals entire religious traditions onto man. to
True.
make one horny guy get his dick wet. But there it is.
Yeah, the entire revelations of the Prophet Muhammad, Piba.
But that and to Mary about her son. But yeah, it is what it is. Sorry, Salt. I just had to chime in with that.
No, please do, honestly. I think it's interesting as well because in general the topic's probably had a bit of a resurgence in the past 5 decades in the West, right? And according to Francis Young, anyway, one of the reasons for this was the concerns of Pope Leo XIII regarding a Freemason conspiracy.
Oh my God, yeah. In this house, we love Francis Young, one of our favorite academics.
For real. And
I also love Freemason conspiracies.
Yeah.
We're all occultists here. We know what they get up to, right? And so...
Yeah, it's boring spaghetti dinners. No offense to my Mason friends, which I have many, but I've heard from y'all what it's like, and it's a lot of trying to organize events and dinners. Much love to my Masonic friends. Okay, I'm not making fun of you. I'm just acknowledging your grievances that you aired out to me.
Yeah, was also gonna say that is nothing against any Masonic order. That is directly from the mouths of Mason friends of mine who've been Masons from the time of their youth because their dads are also Masons.
But you know what? You guys got great cemeteries and freaking awesome apparel. I just wish that you actually did run the world in the way that you are alleged to.
I mean, hey, at least the fact that they're alleged to has seen a uptick in exorcism, at least in the Catholic Church. I mean, I don't think it'd be fair to rule out modern day Protestant traditions of charismatic exorcism and the like, but not to mention the whole media and movie depictions going strong as well. I mean, there's more than a few banger films.
Also, as Orthodox, I'm just saying.
Not like other girls, you're Orthodox.
I'm literally not like other girls. Yeah, I have an enormous beard, and I can get married because I'm Orthodox.
It's
Thank God.
Thank you, Saul.
Yeah, I think when it comes to exorcism, whilst a lot of pop culture really does focus on the clerical, I think there's also, we need to pay a lot of attention to the folk elements involved, lay exorcisms, not just the written works that were likely written down by members of the clerical, or as is the case later on with the grimoires, the professional classes. And I think the witch bowl is a good example of this. It's a lay exorcism in the sense that the subject of the exorcism is malefic magic, and which is causing harm to a patient or patron.
Yeah, and not only literally exercising a witch's magic, right, but preventing her actual, her spirit, her person, her identity from entering into your home and life through, I mean, in most cases, permanently stopping up her urine, right, is kind of how the sympathetic link of it goes. But yeah, I just love that you put that point, because we often think of defensive magic and exorcism is a little bit different. Like an exorcism is explicitly expelling a spirit from a person or a place, But in this case, you make a really good point, right? Is that it's witch bottles are, how we categorize things is protective versus amulet versus talisman. I mean, you can quibble about these details, but ultimately that is literally exercising both magic and the spirit, which is, the incarnate witch or the witch being that is doing this to you.
Yeah, exactly. Just because it's protective, it doesn't mean that it's not also dealing with the issue at its root, right? You're still commanding and compelling their magic in a sense where maybe it's not by words, but instead by ritual actions or the use of sympathetic materials, which we see a lot, especially in the Babylonian and Mesopotamian sources. You just see, hey, this ghost is bothering this guy. Okay, well, let's put in a wax figure and then melt said figurine.
Is he bothering you, Queen?
Exactly.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll continue.
So, obviously, witch bowls are protective in function and a decoy, and it's probably the more common usage today. But like you were just saying, it's also used aggressively in counter magic, and burning the bottle in fire till it bursts to break the magic and kill the witch was one historical use of it. And sometimes this was lethal not just for the witch, as in the case of John Etworth of Bradford, whose client was one unfortunate soul. The bottle exploded in the fireplace, killing the poor bastard with shrapnel, probably nails, piss, and all the other nasty ingredients you put in there as well. It's not a good way to go, but also a sign that whoever put the hammer on him wasn't someone to be trifled with there. It's a bit of a flex, right? Imagine cursing someone in the very act of trying to lift that curse is what kills him. Yikes.
I major respect for whoever was cursing this guy. Also, I think, yeah, indeed. And I think it's worth noting, bury your witch bottles properly if they contain urine. The gas will make them burst if you're not careful. And don't store them in your house, just casually in your closet.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, or just like in your living room behind your. I mean, yes, I know that's traditional not to put them in chimneys and things, but like, be careful.
Mum
You
found
don't
the
want it
witch
to.
ball, guys.
No. Oh no, Mom found the witch bottle. It was in the piss drawer.
There's an account in Hyatt's folklore from Adams County that involves the creation and boiling of a witch bottle on the stove until the witch shows up at the house. And when she shows up being like, stop doing that, the people inside are instructed to be like, no, and continue boiling it until she dies on their doorstep.
Now that is a flex on their part. And I also love that she can't enter because of the magic, right? It's kind of like you need to be invited in, as it were, but you're literally having your license revoked.
There's also explicit instruction given, as I'm sure we'll discuss in future exorcisms of this episode, to kind of make airtight the house in the sense of close all the doors, close all the windows, and presumably traced back to the aerial spirits of illness and disease who enter through the open portals into the home.
Yeah, definitely. The relationship of, witches and flying through the air and, breath itself is a vehicle for spirit. It is spirit in a lot of cases and definitions. So, like, it definitely makes a lot of sense there to be sealing off whatever you can.
So I'm curious because we've been talking about exorcism a lot, so far, kind of circling around the idea of it. So I'm curious, like, when you say exorcism, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you? Since we've already established we're not just talking about clergy, like priests, exorcising, a demon-ridden girl or something like that. But we also have noted, Babylonian priests have, and having a particular sanction on the state, capacity to have access to magic versus like a lay healer in some village in Mesopotamia, having a very different relationship to that kind of power. So what comes to mind for you?
So, like you mentioned at the start of the episode, it's a very complicated word as far as its etymology and use throughout history, very culturally dependent. Different cultures might use similar words for approximately the same idea, and sometimes there'll be more distinctions involved in that. But in the case of this episode, without giving it too serious a definition, I think that I'd be falling into a bit of a trap on my part. I think how we're going to use it in this episode is in the sense of commanding, compelling, and expelling spiritual creatures or qualities that we might associate with those said spiritual creatures. Or alternatively, the influence or power of a practitioner of witchcraft and magic, as well as the things in the physical world that might be acting as agents of these forces, such as animals, pests, weather. And this can be driving out a spirit from a body, a curse from a person. It can be removing miasma and impurity from a night in pride of consecration. It can be lifting the devil out of his soul, or driving a ghost out of an household. Or even just setting down certain terms for a spirit to follow during the ceremony itself when it appears, Be truthful, be honest, under pain of eternal hellfire and damnation. If you lie to me, I'm just going to sentence you to an eternity of torment in the fires. Like, these are all, in my mind, forms of exorcism that they generally utilize a ritual formula, whether spoken or explicit, or instead by ritual actions or objects. But these are often done in tandem with each other as well, especially in less orthodox forms of exorcism, practiced outside of the bounds of the church, or in pre-Christian cultures. Not that these things aren't done in tandem in Christian cultures as well, of course. And I think as well, another defining aspect of exorcism that probably isn't necessary, but does seem very common to most expressions of it that we've encountered is use of legislative and legal language. which makes
Mhm.
sense when we consider the etymology of the term exorcism. And to do that, we're going to quote from Francis Young here, who says,
The Latin word exorcizo, a direct borrowing from the Greek, originated in legal terminology. Its ultimate root was the Greek horkos, an oath. To exercise, in its Greek and Latin legal meanings, meant to swear an oath, and in Latin became almost synonymous with conjuro, to take an oath together. However, over time, the compound verb conjuro was used as an intensified form of the verb juro, I swear, and in late Latin, it came to have the sense of beg or implore. The medieval Latin conjuro produced the English word conjure, whose original legal and religious sense has now been replaced almost completely by its magical sense, which has always existed alongside the other meanings. The difficulty of separating exorcism from magic therefore occurs at the linguistic level. Conjuration is an activity of the magician and exorcist alike.
so what this quote is showing us is the intimate relationship between exorcism and law, as well as its relationship to the word conjure. And these are all very common features of ritual magic manuscripts. Yet we also find them within church beliefs as well, evidently. And it's a term that holds a lot of implications, and whilst the cross-cultural comparison is certainly not the goal of this little podcast episode, you will see the same legalistic approach to exorcism in cultures far outside the purview of Christianity. For example, in Chinese folk religion and Orthodox Taoism, specifically Zhengyi, you'll often hear about arresting spirits in a sense of, well, arresting them, sometimes even killing them or delivering them to senior deities to be judged by the heavenly and underworld courts. There are even cases of demons being subdued by gods and becoming themselves agents of the gods.
We even saw that, earlier in the mention of like moving spirits from hierarchies, right? In the mention of what, Key's ritual. I know, we'll do other episodes on this in the future. And actually there's one coming up soon on were-tigers that mentions this of like demons and such spirits being forced to serve the gods and become their agents. But I'm curious, can you touch a little bit more on what your understanding is about like arresting spirits? Like, do they go to spirit jail?
So honestly, that goes a little bit beyond my understanding. I know that in some cases it would be literal punishment of a spirit, especially one who's aware of what it's doing. In other cases, as we just said, it might be appropriation into a hierarchy. I mean, some of the lineage protectors in certain lineages are this kind of spirit. I think that's very much a common theme in East Asian religion in general, is certain deities being very furious and essentially elevated and pacified to become agents of, heaven or other deities. I really do like that kind of attitude of, okay, well, the spirit was initially enraged and furious, but
Like a wrathful, being becoming a protector that is still wrathful, but uses that to cut down other spirits, like a Akala or Fudomyu comes to my mind as well.
exactly. Like it's kind of in line with their intrinsic nature, almost, you might say. But
So arresting in this case is a bit more like apprehending a spirit and seizing them.
yes, it is. It is generally speaking like very much akin to what we would say arresting in the physical sense. You are
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, you even see it in the grimoires, right? Like, hey, if you don't comply, then both Satan's angels and God's angels are going to throw you down into the pit. Like there's always this kind of imminent threat when it comes to exorcism of, it's not just the punishment that you're describing in the moment, it's also the potential of further punishment or being dealt with by people who have more effective means of dealing with them than the human exorcist, who is already, in the sense of the ritual itself, kind of given this semi-divine power or ability and authority to act in the name of his god or gods, respectively. Evidently, this legalistic way of looking at exorcism isn't really unique to the Christian world, but rather, often enough, it's common to the whole idea and concept. It makes sense that exorcism as an aggressive act occurs usually when the spiritual interferes with the mundane or the typical functioning of human society. Human beings are not the only ones with law and order, and so when the spirits are the force that's breaking the already established order of the world, it's necessary to deal with this by spiritual means. Much as we'd approach a court of law in order to deal with a case of assault with a weapon, we might approach a spiritual authority in order to deal with a case of disease demons or a wandering revenant and ghost, or as the exorcist often does, act as the embodiment of that authority, the executioner and agent of it who carries out its intentions and corrects error.
Mm-hmm.
Because the exorcist isn't necessarily acting on his own behalf. If you wander around jumping on every random spirit, every mildly poorly behaved ghost, you are going to piss off a lot of people. You're going to piss off a lot of spirits. You're going to find yourself in a not so great situation. I mean, if you're too heavy handed, even with the grimoiric spirits, like I have seen what happens when you get too heavy handed with them, and it's not great. It takes a lot to kind of fix that. And I'm personally not a fan of being friends with the spirits who we find in the book of Officers of Spirits and so on, but it is necessary to kind of approach it with some tact. I think that's and recognizing that we, the magicians or the priests, we are not the ones who are actually carrying out this process outside of the ritual actions. We are depending on authority greater than ourselves, whatsoever that might be.
It's like this is just on the top of my memory, so this is definitely not, exactly as it was written, but I remember I mentioned like the Cyprian prayer, right? The Coptic one appears in the Marvin May and Richard Smith anthology, Ancient Christian Magic. There's a whole in the introduction chapter, like one thing that they continually highlight is like, okay, yes, we know magic is hard to define, but like the genre of magic that we're looking at here, these spells, as you want to call them, they are deeply invested in borrowing and appropriating power. Whether I am Cyprian or whether, I am Solomon or, whatever, you are constantly borrowing, appropriating, harnessing, and wielding power over other things, power that is not necessarily inherently earned. It's a little bit different when, it's like, it was a Jesus I know and Paul I know, but who are you, right? But it's also a matter of ensuring that how are you supposed to just plug and play and get things to obey? In the PGM, it's sometimes like the shotgun approach of just name every deity that you can think of, and at some point the spirit will be like, oh, not that one, not that one, not that one. You know what? Actually, I do obey some daimon that serves that one, or maybe to obey the deity itself. Okay, fine. But in other cases, it's really all about like ensuring that you don't get destroyed for the arrogance of compelling spirits, because you're wrapped up in the cloak of this utter authority that you've essentially not earned, but are borrowing and just using for your own needs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even when there is less devoted level of appropriation, like naming gods you've never really engaged with in your life or specific spirits, like, they know and they just let that slide because it's part of their job is keeping an eye on that spirit that you're conjuring, perhaps. But even so, like, it's not something to be abused. It's not something to be overemphasized. I think people can get wrapped up in how cool exorcism seems as a ritual process and not realize that it's exhausting. I mean, it's hours sat there telling a very pissed off spirit who doesn't even want to be in the room with you. Like, right, just behave. And
I should add to the earlier story, the part that I omitted from that description was hopping a fence to find privacy, burning an inordinately large amount of offerings, and incanting for well on 3 hours to be like, can you chill for like 2 seconds? Long enough for you to be in this trap, So it is a duel. It is a very protracted, I want to put it in the martial terms, like a fight, a battle, a brawl, but sometimes, it can be something else.
Yeah, and I like that, you mentioned this was made possible by the fact that you did have a relationship with the powers that you were calling on. It wasn't like you just rolled up that day calling Hegate's name or St. Christopher's name, like you had, many experiences with them already and had already made pacts and agreements with them, that pacts that aren't just about what they can do for you, but what you can do for them, that you are held to by your community of spirits, which is why I really like that in the Francis Young quote that I read earlier, the relationship between conjuring and like swearing an oath with exercising, this begging, imploring, kind of like we are both in it together type, aspect of it makes me think of like geomantic figure conjunctio as well. It's like, it's not just getting something to leave, it's we're both agreeing to be a part of the ritual hierarchy of authority in which we can even do this.
Exactly, yeah. We're kind of, you're taking part and you're joining that same hierarchy and you're eking out your place in it, but that also means kind of knowing where you sit in it and not exploiting that position that you have unless you want to be,
And just to dig into that protracted geometric metaphor, as it were, is the in conjunctio, the active Principles being
The fire and the water.
taking the spirit out of the air
Mhm.
and pacifying it in some ways. The active principle of water being baptism.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
running these cooling waters over their head and saying, instead of subjugating these spirits, being like, be pacified, move from this place, be gone, whatever causes you to be enraged, whatever causes you to cause illness in this place, go from here.
Mhm.
Be no longer a participant in this action.
Yeah, because like we're not just like thrown into the world, without any connections. Like spirits have hierarchies, as Saul was saying, and societies and their own civilizations entirely independent of ours. Like you can't just come in there and be like, I demand this. Like you have to plug yourself into that hierarchy in order for it to start even having a hope of working. So it's one of those things that like, you may not consent to living in a society necessarily in which the state in a physical sense has a very particular monopoly of the force, is able to execute that force through its agents like police and army and so on, and is able to demand things of you in terms of your behavior, what is legal, what is not legal, but at the same time you also benefit from certain aspects of living within it, like you didn't have to invent all of its structures yourself. So in that sense, same with spirits, right? Like you may not like the way spirits operate within their societies, but you do have to understand that you got to speak their language to get them to move for you, especially in moments that are more contractual and less about like an amicable, loving, kind of like friendly relationship with a particular familiar. Although, of course, every spirit has its own story and reasons for being and agenda. No matter how amicable the relationship is, always be aware that, just as you have your own agenda, so do they.
Definitely, definitely. And I think as well, like sometimes that hierarchy in relationship can be adversarial. I think the demons are a good case of that. And yet there's this dependence on what is above you in the hierarchy. But you also need to examine how are you related to the things that, in the context of the ritual itself, how are you interacting with what is below you, which for the purpose of exorcism, right? Like pretty much every single subject of the exorcism is in that particular moment below, not because of any innate superiority, but like we've said, like the way the hierarchy changes and we start assuming certain roles. And so I think navigating both what's up in the sky and what's under your feet is really very much important in these matters. So today's episode is really going to focus on the practice of exorcism as it occurs in Antiquity, and part 2 will be more focused on Christian exorcism as well as that found in the grimoires. And in part, to be honest, this is because it's a little bit common in some contemporary practices to whitewash the spirits and gods of Antiquity. But the reality is that polytheistic societies and cultures have their own devils and demons to be dealt with. In fact, you might say that they can sometimes have more of these antagonistic spirits as far as diversity, at least. We have restless dead, even upset by righteous ancestors, nature spirits, terrestrial minor gods who are their own hierarchies and orders compared to the more perfected divinities that extend throughout creation. You have messengers of God or gods acting out and misbehaving, taking the right to punish human beings too far and decimating towns, which is often addressed by appealing to the god above them or a more senior messenger. And you also have the idea of rebel spirits who directly oppose the gods. The idea of fallen angels and rebel spirits or otherwise antagonistic demons who defy heaven and seek to end creation or disrupt the divine order, however you define it, is not a unique quality of Christianity. It's present in Egyptian belief as well as Babylonian. And various others. Human beings are often tasked with helping deal with these as well. And priests play an important role in this, often acting as private exorcists, but also sometimes as the state-sanctioned ones.
I'm so glad you bring this up because you're right. It does get whitewashed often. Like too often we see this misconception that it was like Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and so on that introduced these notions of like demons and interfering pernicious spirits, as well as like the technologies for how to deal with them. But like that is so not true. Like there are entire schools of Babylonian magic created to deal with them and this and set this relationship between state, heaven, and people, aright, and so on. And like, I mean, even the names for some of like the demons that we often think of, like Astaroth, for example, in the grimoires, like all of that comes back to like Persian, demonology. Like, and I don't know, I just think it's kind of like wild when sometimes people get really defensive about aggressive exorcisms and think like, oh, it's just like an invention of like monotheistic traditions. When it's just like, I mean, So much of Egyptian magic is based on exorcism, which I'm excited to hear you talk more about, Assault.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a great example that we're going to start with is the Leiden Papyrus, which deals various exorcistic and medical works to be performed against the demon Samanu and Aku, who cause skin disease. And the former of this wicked power was actually imported, having a long history throughout the ancient Near East. And as a result, we see not just Egyptian gods, but also Canaanite deities invoked in dealing with him. And the translator Suzanne Beck details that within the context of the Leiden Papyrus, this demon is specifically associated with skin diseases. But elsewhere, he is typically also associated not only against humans, but also crops, livestock, even deities. One such exorcism is as follows.
The rage of Set is against Samanu. The uproar of Baal is against you. The rage of the storm, while it is thirsting for rain from the skies against you. It shall exhaust its bodily strength, his two arms above you. You shall taste that which the sea has tasted by his hand. The water shall approach you. Baal shall strike against you with spears of coniferous wood which are at his hand. He repeatedly strikes against you with spears of coniferous wood which are against his hand. You shall be alike like that, O Samanu. The gods act against you, and the accusing which the god makes, and the water, and the numerous poisons of the weather god, and the bitter poisons of Shu, the son of Ra, and the poisons of Wephoet, which are like those of a snake. The poisons of the god above, and Nikal and his wife, the poisons of Rashep and the Adama his wife, the poisons of the flame are against you, O Aku. The poisons of the flame are those which will extinguish you. You shall expire as yesterday expired. You shall be extinguished as the light is extinguished. For those who are moribund, you shall retreat upon the ground. You shall die. The gods shall learn that you are dead. The Hathors shall learn that your heart has come forth. I shall tell it to the morning god, and welfare and health which delight that the heart are coming to the house of Ra, with the words that Horus had conquered Samanu.
God, I really like that one. It's interesting as well because the translation, has many different like versions of so some of the nouns and verbs are, but I really like that it calls on the Egyptian and Canaanite deities, and that you have this whole idea of like you expire as yesterday expired, right? That makes me think of like Ra traveling in the sun and the solar bark, and setting the world aright again every day, thanks to the efforts of all of the beings, that hold aloft, the skies and this cosmology, as well as, Kepra and Set and Mehen and so on. I just love the idea that like this is all of these different like major creator and martial deities are coming together to slay this particular demon.
I think it's clearly a bit of a big job considering he got his way around the entire ancient Near East, right? Like he didn't just stop at one culture or country. He just decides to go all the way across the Levant, all the way down to Egypt. It's like, man, we really have to deal with this guy, don't we?
Yeah, I'm like it's skin disease. It's no joke.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things about the conjuration, having read it and kind of played over it in my mind, is the Samanu being the particular demon that besets upon people, but also Aku being potentially syncretized with this being, or another name for this being, in the sense of, later translation in line 14 of the particular Lydian papyrus being invariably Aku, whereas the others are varying as Aku or Samanu.
I think it's one of those like plug and play situations where like it depends on which demon you're naming is responsible for the disease, because both of them are demons of skin disease, right? So in this case, it's like whichever one you're particularly conjuring can kind of like swap it.
Also, just going back to the earlier point as well, the really interesting plug and play as well from the pantheons that you're calling upon, of course, the rage of Set, the
uproar of Baal.
The uproar of Baal at the same time, also, calling upon
poisons
Nikal,
of Wephoet,
exactly, and just going along that way where it's perhaps a more refined approach than the PGM authors, where it's just, I don't know, name everything, we'll see what sticks. But this is, naming very particular wrathful sky deities who are capable of, invoking, containing, controlling poison that are also upon the air that are contacting the skin.
I'll be honest. I definitely prefer some of the earlier Egyptian liturgical styles that you might see in Middle Egyptian, for example, or Late Egyptian, compared to what you generally find in the PGM. It's I don't know, there's something about the way the liturgy is normally written. Like it's just beautiful. It really is.
Hmm.
And we have another example, of course, which I really like, and you can see the Exorcist is compared to the god Ra, and this one take on the role of the god in order to access the ritual authority of Nature Re. In the same manner, there's also the comparison to the cosmological effect of the sun rising, and the permanence that is the ascension of the god into the sky each day, and by this very same permanence the demon is overcome and subdued.
Behold, I have overcome you, O Samanu. Behold, I have overcome you, the one who is submerged in the limbs of NN, whom NN has borne. Like the one who is flying up and established permanently at the high place, like a ray flies upon during his rising. In like manner, I have overcome you.
This manner of assuming the role of the gods is a cornerstone of Egyptian magical literature. We do need to know that it's not quite possession or assumption of a god form as certain New Age would describe it, but rather it's the magician assuming the function or role of the god in an act of ritual identification. The action that is being undertaken is resemblance to the activity of the god, and therefore, by this act of ritual identification, the conjurer is accessing the divine office and authority as well as power of that deity. It is a kind of mimicry, one that provisions divine help by likeness and sympathy, concepts fundamental to almost all kinds of magic. This same kind of sympathy is carried with ritual instruments and offerings, for example, as well, identifying an offering of incense with the eye of Horus. Take this, soul, nurture. It is the eye of Horus set which sustains you. Note that Egyptian exorcisms are not just aimed at and addressing evil spirits and disease, but even insects, serpents, scorpions, and similar pests, which we ought to keep in mind are themselves often related to spirits of disorder, either for ritual purposes or simply due to the harm that they can cause upon the community. These exorcisms are something I've used prior, actually, and I've also helped others to use, and I can confirm that they can be quite effective in getting rid of pests who seem stubborn or a nuisance to the home itself.
There's an example of that burned into my mind. One of our good friends, we were all on a voice call and Discord together, and she was like freaking out and being like, "Oh my goodness, there's like a gigantic cockroach in my apartment right now," and she's like quite scared of cockroaches. And while having like a very sincere response to this, because obviously like this was quite terrifying for her. So you on the call were like, hold on one second. And you gave her a whole recipe of like, draw this on paper, say this like beautiful, like Middle Egyptian style, like exorcism, like where even the grammar that you were using is very Middle Egyptian. And she did it, and like the cockroach literally just left, like it completely vanished, and and she was able to like overcome her adversary. But like it's little stuff like that, like that seems like what an example of like one pest. But like imagine like a swarm of locusts. Imagine like a woodpecker going straight through your drywall or something like that. Which is a personal experience that I had in a house I used to live in, when there was one just destroying the drywall, like just trying to get to the stucco. And so I had to use, it was a Coptic exorcism, like a little one I made on papyrus, and I just like inserted it into the house, and the woodpecker fucked off, thank goodness. But it was I rewrote the liturgy to, instead of like, oh, it's like locusts and ticks and scorpions and whatever like that, I was just like, it's just woodpecker, I'll be honest. It's just this damn thing. So yeah, it's like it's not just there's like these little examples of like, here's this one animal that's causing problems, but like you can imagine how serious this is when it's like a slew of pests that are causing disease and destroying the infrastructure of your home, when this could be very, very important.
Yeah, for real. I mean, we've all seen how the Egyptians felt about certain kinds of birds, like sparrows, like they're identified actively with rebel gods and stuff fairly regularly. And it's important to note that these animals are not always treated as adversarial. Serpents, for example, have religious significance as theophanies of gods, and in the case of scorpions, we all know the myths regarding Horus the Younger, son of Isis, right, where we see the scorpion goddess Serket playing an important role in protecting the young child god. But this also kind of speaks to the ritual protocols at play, and even the role of that creature who is the subject of the exorcism, because when it comes time that we want rid of certain creatures, they're no longer theophanies of divinities, but rather the representation of some kind of adversarial force that opposes either the gods or the divinely sanctioned order that they've established. When we might argue that this is due to the function being played by the creature. When they're helpful to man, they resemble divinity. And when they scourge man, they can no longer really be associated with that divine benevolence and therefore are acting in discord with that, right? So we need to deal with these things in like capacity, much as human beings can err from an upward facing path to become wicked spirits or raging dead people. So likewise, even the natural world and animals around us are prone to the same. And people might argue that this is a very human-centric attitude, right? But keep in mind, it's something that goes both ways. We all know the myths about the woodcutter cutting down a sacred tree and being punished by lightning, plague, swords, all kinds of punishments because mankind transgressed on nature. But the thing about exorcism is, to my mind at least, as much as man is punished by transgressing on nature, it's also a means for man to navigate his relationship with the natural world and essentially deal with what happens when nature transgresses on civilization and his only recourse is by spiritual means. In other words, the playing field is kind of balanced through this way.
I really love how well you pointed out the importance of exorcism in the ancient Near East as like not just being about individual demons or messengers of unruly gods and so on being put back into their particular order, and not just like they've strayed from an order, but more like it's just not. It's like if it's a different order that's conflicting with your own in civilization, but also the sort of like healing and protective properties of this in terms of establishing kind of societal norms as opposed to just like your own personal health, right? One of the future episodes that I really want to do, which I'm already working on, is one on like incantation bowls. So like those demon spiraling, bowls that are buried upside down and trap wandering spirits or a particular demon. And this is a hugely popular form of magic from the Mesopotamian, especially Babylonian, Hebrew, and even the Syriac contexts throughout the, that sort of region of the world. And without giving away too much for this episode, as I'm currently kind of drafting a lot of that research, I wanted to ask if I wanted to actually read out an inscription of one that I think is clearly demonstrating some of what you were touching before, right? So this is Syriac Incantation Bowl VK 5738:3. I know this is a little pot calling the kettle black because my first language is Serbo-Croatian, but the names in here have no vowels, which, obviously there's not that they're intended to be, they're intended to have vowels. This is like Hebrew and ancient Egyptian, right? Syriac. There's going to be many of these similar languages in which the vowels aren't written, but you get what I mean. I've tortured you guys enough with Serbo-Croatian tongue twisters about actually having no vowels. Okay. Anyway, but we're gonna you've heard too many of these. We're gonna do a little Egyptology trick of just assuming that the vowels that are missing are E's. In pronouncing these. And I've given Key the task of reading this one out loud, but he got some help.
Yeah, so before we recorded this episode, I called up a friend of all three of ours who happens, luckily, to be an Egyptologist who speaks very good Middle Egyptian.
She would say, I don't speak it, I read it and I translate it, but like you take her to a museum and she's like, classic 16th dynasty or like century. Like you can just really tell by the nose and the lips. And also like I don't need to like, the Narmer palette, easy. I already know what it says on it. And like she won't even read the description, she'll just like actually translate the hieroglyphs. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. Also, is learning Arabic currently, it is just breezing through it because it's like, oh, this is just Arabic. Or excuse me, this is just Middle Egyptian.
Yeah.
Being like, this character, it's hand with bread. Easy.
That one's just two squiggly lines, like Aquarius, yeah.
Yeah, so I called her up and was like, how do you say this? And, she gave me an idea of a best guess at the vowels, filling in the abjad for the reader.
And also this is the pronunciation in general. Where the glottal stops are. All right.
Yeah. So here it is.
Yeah, give it to us.
Prepared is this amulet for the healing and protection of the house and dwelling of Peruka'ad, son of Ba'uni, and the Shashin, daughter of Gushni, and Medbud and Metadur Gushnisep, and Bedr Gedbedr, son of Shashin. The mystery of heaven in heaven is buried, and the mystery of earth in the earth is buried. And the mystery of this house I say against sorcery and against all magical acts and against all messengers and idol spirits and against the troops of demons and against all amulet spirits and goddesses and against all demons and devils and mighty satans and mighty liliths. One declares the spell to you. Everyone who accepts it find goodness, and he who is wicked does not accept the spells and the mysteries, sabers and swords come against him. And they stand in front of him, and they kill him, and the fire surrounds him, and the flames fall upon him. He who listens to spell, he sits in the house, eats and feeds, drinks and pours drink, rejoices and causes joy. Brother for its people he is, and friends for the dwellers of the house. Comrade for children he is, an educator is called, companion for the cattle he is, and a genius of good fortune is called. Accept peace from your Father who is in heaven, and 7 pieces from male gods and from female goddesses. The one who makes peace wins his judgment. The one who causes destruction is burnt in fires. Moreover, you, spirits and amulet spirits, and Liliths, and Mevakaltas, and demons, and devils, and misfortunes, and no good ones, and evil spirits, and wicked amulet spirits, male idol spirits, and goddesses, and curses, and invocations, and shames, and vows, and debility, and evil worship, and spells that are cursed, and battered, and dissolves, depart, and flee.
Fun fact, this particular bowl was found in Baghdad in 1976, and it was given to the president of Finland as a gift by the Iraqi government in 1977, which is an awesome gift, to be honest. It currently sits in the Finnish National Museum in Helsinki. And what I love about this bowl, as with many of the spells and incantations of this genre, is that it leverages the authority of heavenly and celestial forces, right, in order to exorcise the various demons, spirits, the Liliths, the Satans, the no good ones, that are thought to cause, illness, disease, and harm against humans. So this text is going to draw on biblical motifs, as well as late antique Mediterranean demonological understandings. Well, and it functions a bit more like a prayer, the form of which is disployed, obviously, in this kind of spiraling writing that covers the bowl itself. And in this bowl, the conjuration, states several times, right, that the aim is to protect the client from magic, witchcraft, and curses. And I think what's important to note here is that in the vast majority of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Syriac bowls, as well as ritual fragments of those kinds of techniques that have been preserved more broadly. So they wouldn't be found necessarily just on a bowl, but also in a prayer manual or a pamphlet that was distributed. They are anti-magical. They are frequently invoked to protect clients from magic, from sorcery, witchcraft, the evil eye. And all of these things tend to be overwhelmingly described in pejorative terms, such as in the Aramaic sihr. Terms of positive description for these kinds of ritual powers are then, instead inscribed by their makers and users, such as amulet, spell, words, these are all translations obviously in English, but words which suggest protection or defense. And in this way, they aim to fight back against magic or sorcery and this deployment, of course, of powers that might harm and thwart human agency. So the words, as I mentioned before, for magic obviously vary greatly here, hence why amulet and spell, things in English we typically associate with magic, are here deployed as anti-magic protection talismans. But if you're wondering, isn't this all kind of magic? What is really meant by the term here is coercive power over spirits, right? So a pious Christian, Jew, or Muslim might want one of these bowls around to protect them from this kind of intercession while they keep themselves pure spiritually through prayer and exorcism and so on. But they're not interested in compelling spirits, even in the names of saints or even in the names of, angels and so on and so forth, right? Some do, obviously just lots of different examples of, Christian versions of this kind of magic, one which we mentioned earlier. But it's more to say that for those not comfortable with that kind of coercion, what is meant by magic here is explicitly this kind of borrowing and appropriation and this forceful use of ritual power and authority over spirits. So that's why an exorcism like this on this bowl is not necessarily considered to be, quote, magic in the same way, even if we colloquially obviously are yeah, it's obviously magic, to us. But in this cultural context, it's seen more as anti-magic as opposed to anti-compelling spirits to do your bidding. Here you're using a prayer or a spell or an amulet, and all three of these things can always be the same to protect yourself from that kind of thing using an exorcism like this.
That was one of the things I wanted to highlight in the wake of that. Really appreciate you drawing attention to is the instead of the PGM style approach, as it were, where you list a litany of divinities, some of whom you might not even yourself worship or devote yourself to. You invoke, a litany of spirits who could be against you, and to all of them say, "Go away. I don't want you around." Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important distinction to make between, what we would consider as, using the word magic as English speakers as magic and using the word exorcism as English speakers as exorcism is this particular approach where it's not even necessarily magical, like you highlighted. It's just saying everything out of this litany, don't bother me. Just go elsewhere. It doesn't matter where. Just don't be by me.
Yeah.
Which is
Thank you
really
for that be gone from this place key.
interesting.
For real, I just love this example, and I love the diversity for potential sources of demonic and spiritual antagonism in a lot of these bowls. It's just like, let's name every single potential threat under the sun, and then let's add a couple more. Like, I love it, right? Like, it's not just a particular spirit, a single person. It's just the whole core of spiritual opponents, and all of them are apparently subject to the powers of the bowl and the divine power set over it.
I like that it's amulet spirits, evil amulet spirits, male amulet spirits, and female amulet spirits, all as separate things evoked to leave.
You gotta cover your bases, guys. So it's like law. You gotta make sure you state everything in the contract.
Amen. Amen. So, thus far we've mostly focused on Egypt, as well as naturally the Syriac bowls, but we also want to cover Babylonia, Iranic, Greek, and Roman forms of exorcism as well.
Yeah, and make sure you stay tuned for that incantation bowl episode, okay? It's coming, I promise.
Oh, we cannot wait. So, I think another very pertinent example, and I'm kind of impressed we haven't mentioned it yet, is the PGM, which has so many examples of exorcism that it would be a very big task to name the amount of times it occurs. So many of the magical artifacts that survive from this period are specifically meant for exorcism. It's kind of fascinating, really. The arresting and entrapping of spirits who would prey on people being such a major industry. I mean, imagine heading to the hospital today and your doctor prescribes you 3 weeks of tramadol painkillers, antibiotics, and exorcism as part of your treatment to get the demon who causes you symptoms the fuck away from you.
Oh, yes, I'm here for it.
I would heavily fuck with that doctor. I would go to them more than anything.
Also, that's kind of you with your medical astrology to a certain extent, so.
Yeah, okay. There might have been a few times where I've had to prescribe that, but
It's all describing me an entire diet to cure the maladies in my life that actually worked.
And permanently worked.
This medical astrology is kind of a very fun subject,
He's being so modest, it's a specialty.
and there's a reason why he's the one doing the exorcism episode. Despite my anecdote opening it of successfully exorcising a building, Salt is the resident exorcist extraordinaire. So if you're impressed by that, then be afraid of the frightful howls that Salt can utter.
Yeah, and his cool course coming out soon.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be a fun one, and I appreciate it, guys. Seriously, it really is like a passion subject for me. Like, I think one thing as well is the way that going to see a doctor speaks about the communal nature of exorcism and how it's used to serve a given community by ritual specialists, but it did also play a role in private magic and ceremony as well. The PGM is a great example of this, and it features a number of exorcisms even addressed directly to gods. And this might seem a bit impious to some folks, and sometimes even I think it verges on the blasphemous. There's a few that go a bit further than where I'm comfortable, but I think it's good to think about how we described exorcism in its earliest forms as a word for swearing of oaths, and what kind of oaths might gods have to people. So within the ancient Near Eastern theology, as well as Greco-Roman, the gods have a responsibility to people, to the natural world, and generally this responsibility is met by their agents within the world itself. And personally, I say those agents were the messengers, as well as the planets and stars, for those astrologically inclined, to essentially imitate these divine beings. But sometimes these figures can be errant and imperfect in their imitation, and what results from that is you need to kind of poke the gods and say, hey, look, our cities worship you at your festival for the past 5 generations, when you promised to relieve us from famine in exchange for more attention in the ritual calendar. But we've got a famine going on this year and we haven't shirked our obligations, so what's going on? And what is likely going to happen after this is the priest is probably going to find out if there's been some kind of upset. And if not, then he's probably going to poke around and remind the god a little. And the mechanics of exorcism in the Greek magical papyri are often resembling this idea of divine responsibility. Sometimes it can be less a coercion of the gods and more so getting them to do their job. Usually, not always. So you get these situations where it's basically like, hey, you're the god managing X. Well, the ceremony involves X. So if you manage it here for me, since I am acting in the capacity of the god B, then things will work smoothly.
Yeah, and earlier I mentioned like, oh, this link to like being so precise with all these different spirits that are being named in like law or legalistic papers. I just remember that. Okay, I have to obviously restrain myself here with the incantationable examples because obviously it's going to be for a later episode. But I think it's worth noting that this is exactly how these formularies are phrased, like what you're describing here. God manages, X subject, the ceremony involves the subject. So if you manage it here, then you should, do so because I'm acting under responsibility. There's a really interesting demon bowl, actually, or incantation bowl, rather, that invokes the authority of like an earthly judge in divorcing people from demons. So it's framed like a divorce procedure, right? Like, this person is going to be permanently separated from litany of Satan's, Liliths, and no good, ones, ones that don't do any good. It literally looks like a divorce paper, which is signed by the client, put on the bowl with the name of a real life judge that was considered powerful and authoritative, right? So like, it's not clear whether this judge was alive at the time. He's like a rabbi, or whether he, was simply like a really well-known person who was exceptionally just and, powerful and stuff like that, like an ancestral judge, But either way, the relative names of God empower the contract, and they all leverage this capacity and scope of, these people, including the judge, including names of God and so on, having authority of the demons plaguing the client. So that's exactly the kind of case that you're referring to.
God, I love that example so much. That is actually crazy. Like it just goes to show how much this is, intertwined in everyday life as well. So I think this is why it's important to appeal to the right gods in certain ceremonies. The god Anubis is not limited in his power or authority. It's very important to emphasize that, I think, that ancient Near Eastern theology is generally filled with epithets praising the divine and all-overwhelming power of the gods. They are omnipotent in that sense, much as any depiction of a Christian god might be. But what kind of responsibility Anubis has compared to, say, Wetwetl, they might differ, right? So, Anubis has rulership over the mountain overlooking the necropolis. Wetwet leads the royal armies into war. And so part of the reason we appeal to certain gods isn't just because they're better at a given task or because one is more capable. And that definitely does apply to spirits and humans, but not really to gods. Rather, it's in part due to the responsibility that they have over particular matters, which means that you can navigate these matters a little easier and perhaps have more success appealing to a sense of obligation. And that isn't to say that there isn't a kind of just brute force, do this because I said so, I am God, why? And drawing, or alternatively drawing on cosmological powers that compel the kind of response. But sometimes it really is a matter of responsibility on the part of the divine and spiritual and taking charge of the affairs that they are supposed to be governing. And within Egypt, at least, the practice of exorcism was very much a fundamental component of magical and religious practice, whether private or facing a broader community. We also have surviving Mesopotamia and Levantine contexts. Now we have a number of exorcisms surviving from Mesopotamia, in particular the Zaburu Dabeda, which addresses the god Ninkilim, otherwise known as Enazalalu, the lord of the teeming creatures and wildlife. Much as many of the Egyptian exorcisms, this is aimed at field pests who threaten crops.
I, an exorcist of Ea, call upon you as your slave. Arrange for you a sacred ritual apparatus. Present before you a pure offering. I pour for you a libation of sweet wine worthy of your divine personage. Accept, O great Lord Adad, King of Plenty. Eat the tasty food, drink the sweet liquid. Show goodwill toward this plot of farmland, and, O Lord, that you yourself created, the great dogs of Ninkelim, the locust, devourer pest, grub bug whose mouths are a tempest, and their teeth a deluge, expel them from this field.
I love this one. Seriously, there's some lacuna in the text, but I just for some reason there's something about this kind of magic that really does appeal to me. And I think it's kind of the relationship to agriculture and the land as well, right? Like,
I just want to bring up as well the agricultural exorcisms specifically are important to my work, academically, shall we say, and exorcisms that you yourself have formulated against pests and mites and things that would decay against the crops of the field. In my case, specifically fungus gnats, spider mites, and other similar pests, I have used with, great success to keep my research crops alive. which is some cool stuff, but it is to say that the love is not misguided because they're still very much in demand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, imagine, we need to start getting charms for arachnophobes out there, like, like spiders, when they're gone, there are bugs in the house. Okay, well, how about this? We'll keep the spiders and the other bugs out. Not many people can promise you that, eh? Of course, it wasn't just pests. Much as most other ancient cultures, the idea of witchcraft was prominent in the mind of ritual specialists and exists the Ashipu. And we find that most of the surviving records detail the subjects of witchcraft as men, rather than livestock, for example, as we might find in European witch trial accounts. But we need to keep in mind that this is likely a bias due to a dependence on written sources, right? Because who's writing in this time period? It's predominantly men, and specifically men who were members of the elite classes. And contrary to this, the witch themselves are usually gendered as women, or alternatively, demonic and spiritual forces, not really limited to humanity and nature, but instead themselves supernatural monsters.
That's what I've been saying.
Predominantly, but not necessarily always, female night monster. I will probably cut this out in post, but male mystery of witchcraft being that half of the things, namely the women, don't care to talk to you because they're doing cooler things than you will ever do. This is a lesson
don't cut that out. Keep that in.
But yeah, that's the fucking thing that I have learned both the easy and hard way, and tried to emphasize to other people who ask me for advice about what happens when you are a male in a witchcraft tradition that is predominantly female. Of course, participating in one that the anthropological and ethnographic records say it is possible but abnormal to be a male in this thing, with parallels in other geographic areas that I will partially anonymize. Having people that I've met who participate them going, what the fuck are you up to? How do you know this? And reacting with shock and horror to some degree by having the pacts that I do. My answer is the male mysteries of witchcraft are that half of the things in the world, namely the females, don't give a shit what you're doing and don't care about what you're doing and will probably hurt, if not more severely injure you if you try to fuck with them. So, that's kind of the bottom text of the episode is beware the female witches, because they have cool shit going on that we as men are not necessarily privy to, and nor is it our place to be privy to it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm the one who kind of, when you explained your witchcraft to me, I kind of gave you a cultural context for it by being like, I know what that is. Like, I know what you are. Because of all the omens that you have going on, and like all the pacts makes super sense to me. But also, the cultural context I introduce you to is one in which it is possible to be what you are and be a man.
Right.
It's fully documented. That's part of the lore. But at the same time, the female version is much more prominent. And it's that weird line of like, yes, it's prominent because these spirits exist in this kind of capacity, but it's also prominent probably because of it's easier to accuse women of it. Divorced women, old women, barren women, that kind of thing.
Definitely, yeah.
Obviously, like
especially postmortem.
Yeah, especially postmortem as a way to like, isolate and slander them, and the witchcraft being an accusation, the witch is found at the end of the finger, right? The whole Peter Gray quote, because it's really just about leveraging. It's one of those things where like, yes, misogyny is leveraged in these accusations. Doesn't mean the spirits themselves aren't dangerous. It doesn't mean we should whitewash them and be like, these are just goddesses of empowerment, and feminism. It's just like, no, like the Lilith spirits, tear out your womb and attack pregnant women,
Right.
The Balkan Allahs and Ahalas, and these that are like cognates, the spirits of bad weather, predominantly coded as female, and the Mora, the Nochitsa, these kind of like nightmare spirits. Like all the exorcisms are focused primarily against these beings to protect your agriculture, protect your life, to protect yourself from being hag-ridden, and like, yes, of course, there's an element of, socially encoded fears of women and the power of women, in these situations. And it's obviously a good weapon to levy against women that you don't particularly like, or you find particularly creepy, or not, cohering to sort of the patriarchal standard of what they should be doing. At the same time, it doesn't change that these spirits are dangerous. And they're also dangerous to women, right? They don't necessarily protect us as women. They're dangerous to them. They're dangerous to their fertility, to their bodies, to their, marital status, and so on. So just a quick aside, sorry about that, Salt. Just gotta chime in, say that don't go off into the deep end. Just, we don't want to whitewash pre-Christian traditions as not having demons. Don't whitewash the incredible capacity for danger that these Liliths and similar spirits pose to women, especially.
Yeah, I mean, don't apologize for it, because I think, considering we're talking about Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East, and I think there's no other period in history where this whitewashing of specifically female night demons has occurred. It's I think very pertinent to the topic at hand, and I think a demonology episode in the future would be really wonderful.
A modern, capital L Lilith as a pseudo-feminist deity is not my place to comment on, but the lowercase L Liliths plural is, given the entire anthropological, archaeological, ethnographical, persisting to the present day in the Levant record of these beings, as being something that will torment women specifically and be their adversary, and rip out their uterus and cause their pregnancies to miscarry, and cause them specific illnesses to the ovaries and to the uterus and to the any other particular anatomy, is very much so still documented. And the reason to be for a lot of these exorcistic traditions from the Near East that we're discussing today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's kind of staggering just how much materials that exists that seeks to kind of drive them out, protect women and people from them. Like I think, especially when you consider the amount of evidence we have, it doesn't make up an insubstantial portion of what we have available to us, But then I think that goes for exorcism in general, right? It's just kind of so prominent in history that it's one of the things you will almost always encounter when you start investigating another culture, especially when you come to its religious or spiritual practices. And one of these examples is for undoing witchcraft, which, as we just noted, has a specifically gendered role. But this one is a little more interesting because it does feature a potential male adversary as well. And it has you create figurines of wax depicting both a warlock and a witch, that is, a male and female practitioner of magic. They're then condemned or convicted before Shamash, coated in tallow and burned in a disposable pot, with the following incantation spoken thrice. You then dispose of the pot and the melted wax figurines into a river.
Shamash, may their sorcerous devices return to them who turn to evil against me.
And another similar ceremony details the process of removing the hand of a ghost that has paralyzed the right arm of a patient, showing their concern held towards potential of ghostly or spiritual threats, as well as the usual ancestral issues and dangers of improper burials. Naturally, whilst today the laying of ghosts and dealing with ancestors is less of an issue in explicitly Christian forms of magic, still present certainly, but with far less emphasis or urgency. For polytheistic cultures, this was generally going to be more prominent and more urgent in nature. So you can see that exorcism was a vital part of the spiritual ecosystem of Mesopotamia and Egypt, to the point that the exorcisms were not limited to the people or elite, but even the royalty and state religious affairs. For example, the yearly execrations against the enemy of Ra, in order to help the sun god prevail against the enemy of the gods, would make up a crucial component of Egyptian state ceremonies. If we move a little to the west, over the eastern Mediterranean to Sicily and Greece, we find exorcism is also present within these cultures as well, of course. And one famous spell that I really like comes from Columella, to rid a garden of caterpillars. And this also appears in Pliny and various other sources, And I think I kind of chose this one specifically because it highlights the association with natural and sympathetic, or in this case, antipathic magic with exorcism. The experiment specifically entails a woman who has menstruated to walk 3 times about a garden or field barefoot with hair and clothing loosened in order to make the caterpillars curl up and die, falling from the plants. Colomeda compares this ritual action in a moment of exaggeration, perhaps, with the subduing of the serpent guarding the golden fleece by Medea.
I really like this example actually because, like, you mentioned it might be an exaggeration, but there's such a litany of folk magical traditions about the ability of like menstrual blood to exorcise spirits. Usually it's considered unclean, right? But that's the whole point. Is like, the spirits flee from it, or like in certain witchcraft traditions, just like showing, the blood or of menstruum, or even the vulva itself can like strike fear into their hearts, which of course I can make lots of jokes here about, just like, the power of one's Key already anticipating the pussy power joke, but really it's more I think it's deeper than that, right? It's also showing the spirits like, I can give birth. This is the womb of creation, so I could eat you and rebirth you, and then you'd have to be my son. And you know what a son does in the hierarchy of spirits is obey the mother, right? So there's lots of different like reasons for which that's might be the case. In addition to, although I have to admit, I've never considered using menstrual blood to make caterpillars curl up and die, but that is pretty fun. There's like 10 things in my head right now about and most of them are memes, to be honest, that I could make about this, but I I do like it. There's something about that. With usually you'd see like with magic, it's just like, oh, don't do this if you're menstruating, so I think it's kind of fun to have this, like, oh, you know what, come right out, we need some caterpillars to die, let's go.
So yeah, I don't remember if it was Pliny or Columella here. It may even have been someone else, but I think Pliny. He does actually talk about this ritual, and he talks about it being done in Spain as well, or Hispania. And specifically, he criticizes the way that Spanish women do it, because unlike modest Roman ladies, they would lift up their skirts whilst doing this instead of just loosening it a little bit. Like, and this is obviously a serious problem for Pliny.
Well, listen, they just got to show off what they got and remind those spirits where they can come from.
What is the male witchcraft mystery? It's you're about to be the son to the mother.
Yeah.
Do unspeakable horrors to you in your life. Common theme.
You're like, I'll drink to that. Let's go.
I will literally drink to that.
Cheers.
But no, that's as much as I like to deprecate, that's it's something to take into very serious consideration, because there are, as I'm sure Svinga can attest to more appropriately as the woman involved in this podcast, but the male side of it being, there are things you really shouldn't be approaching. There's plenty else you can do. There's plenty else you can do to be a very, powerful witch, powerful sorcerer, but some things are for the ladies, and that is how the world works, whether you like it or not. And I think you should learn to like it, because you will be hurt very badly if you don't learn to do so.
That's okay, Key. I understand. You can leave the caterpillar genocide to me.
Yeah, right. I'll make sure you keep them out of our garden. I'll deal with the mites. You can deal with the caterpillars.
Yeah. To each their own office, as we have
The division of labor.
So you're such a good boyfriend for entertaining this idea.
The best I know.
That is true. All right, let me hand the episode back to you before we get you too embarrassed, my love.
Okay, yeah. So alongside caterpillars, who everyone's thinking about caterpillars 24/7. Another major issue was concern over the enchanting of crops, the fruges excantare, forbidden by Roman law, with one Furius Cressimus named by Pliny as having been prosecuted by the law for enchanting his neighbour's crops. And this might seem like I'm talking a lot about the agricultural elements of exorcism here, and frankly I am. I think it's a really fascinating use of this magic, and it really highlights the role of magic as equalizer between the natural and what we might call civilized world. Because magic is always liminal. And in the world of agriculture, we see this to be the same. Magic can call down a storm of hail onto someone's crops. It can steal the milk of your neighbor's cow. In the same manner, it can also protect against these things, preserve against the wrath of angry nature spirits and demons, pacify the weather, and protect the household and home. Now, moving on from gardening, reluctantly, of course, another account comes to us from Rome, was recorded by Flavius Josephus, who describes a Jewish exorcist, Eleazar, following in the tradition of Solomon, who performed exorcisms before the emperor Vespasian. Now, this exorcism involved the use of roots inhaled by the soldiers, only for him to collapse and the spirit to depart from him. And to show off his control over the spirit, this exorcist then made them overturn basins to prove his power over the spirit. This very impressive example stands out to me, and perhaps you might wonder about potential polemic influences in this account. Either way, it likely does depict popular understandings of exorcisms, and it kind of mirrors, in a lot of respects, Philostratus' writing on Apollonius of Tyana, who commanded a demon to depart a youth, only to command it to prove that it had left the boy immediately after.
That's our donkey boy.
That's
Mhm.
Donkey Man.
It's a
It
donkey
is.
man. That's him.
Yeah. Doing the donkey ritual and being referred to as Apollonius of Tyana gives him a special place in my heart in this
Mhm.
way.
Well, if you're really Apollonius, then what you're going to do soon, I'm hoping, is you're going to exercise a young fellow, and when the demon gets out of his body, you're going to tell him to prove that it's out of the body. And what the demon's going to do is going to knock down a statue. Because apparently in the first century, demons were just big fans of knocking things down or knocking them over to prove that they left someone's body. Maybe the fault lies with the exorcist there. Maybe he's got a thing for showmanship, but whether this is ready for the spectators is another matter entirely. I think as far as good ritual protocol goes, it does make sense to verify your control over the spirit by making a demanding task. Very, very helpful in grimoiric experiments, for example, but we won't go too much into that for now. So in the Greek context, we also find the grimoire, specialists in purification of miasma, usually by water, and whether it was self-incurred or by external agents such as spirits and sorcerers. But of course, perhaps a little more interestingly for our readers, we also have the use of exorcism as ritual aid, and we find in the previously mentioned Greek magical papyri, which we have thus far neglected, a very, very vast treasure trove of these rituals and ceremonies that utilize this exorcistic method. One particularly bold example is found in PGM 5, where the magician threatens that there'll be no oracles given by the gods until he's able to know the thoughts of every Egyptian, Greek, Syrian, and every other race of people. And I just love this one. It's batshit crazy. Like, I want to know everyone's thoughts. And if you don't let me know this, the gods can't speak to people anymore. No, I'm banning oracles. Like,
There's so many cases in the PGM where like divinatory aids say like I want to know what's in the minds of Egyptians, Greeks, Syrians, and like lists other ethnicities, but it's usually those three. The Hermes ring one that I've done is much the same.
I love it. I love it. There's another example as well, right? And that's PGM 43086, which details an exorcism
Oh, yes.
of Kronos.
Oh, yes.
This exorcism isn't to drive out or expel the god. Its intention is to compel him into giving an answer to the question sought. A use of exorcism that we see very often today in magical literature as well, and clearly Antiquity was no different. But really, I'm not the person who should be talking about this particular experiment, because I think in this case it's best to defer to Swinger.
You were like telling me, oh, I want to include a PGM, like out of the many exorcisms, I want to include one. And you're like, what about this one? Isn't this one cool? I want to do this. And then like, I was just staring at you. And then you were like, wait a second, this is the one that you did. And I'm like, I have the phylactery upstairs in our shrine room. Do you want to see it, baby? Yeah, so I did this one. I have a post on it with Cutting a Command called Oracle of Kronos PGM for 3086 to 3124. You know, obviously I don't want to just repeat what was in the post. You're free to look at it if you'd like. But the gist of the ritual is, as you know, Salt says, you're supposed to compel the god Kronos to appear and give an answer to a question by exercising him. And you essentially go to a place where grass grows at night, and you grind salt in a hand mill, and you speak a formula until the god arrives. And it's worth noting here that, sowing salt and like grinding it into fields was a form of essentially like weaponry against other people. If you conquered an area, you could essentially sow salt into the agricultural fields to prevent things from growing. And Kronos, being a god that patrons agriculture, this is clearly meant to offend him, essentially. So you're supposed to be clothed in clean linen, the garb of a priest of Isis, and you have an offering of sage, the heart of a cat, and horse manure. The horse manure I gathered with gloves and a plug nose, from a farm.
Yeah.
Just a pinch. Probably one of the grosser things that I've had to gather from magic, but not nearly within the top 5, probably. And then you make a phylactery as well that you hold, which is carved out of a rib of either a young pig, so one that hasn't reached sexual maturity, or a black scaly castrated boar. And the phylactery itself is an image of Zeus holding a sickle with the inscription Kthomilon. And it's worth noting that within the conjuration, Kronos is continually conflated with his own father, Oronus. Just a reference to him as a hermaphrodite, whom the transgression was committed by his own son, which is a reference to Kronos severing Oronus's genitals with a sickle, right? So, which actually, I know in the post, it makes him a eunuch, not a hermaphrodite. This is the result of this is how Aphrodite was born, as well as the Furies. But, it's a coercive ritual, and I got the piglet's rib from a butcher shop. I just asked for a piglet specifically, so one that hadn't reached sexual maturity, and of course, I also was able to get the cat heart on the internet, and you were the one who made sure to strip the formalin away from it, so I could actually burn it on the charcoal.
Took my, histology papers to heart from...
To heart, haha.
My heart, yeah, from university, and was able to do the requisite biochemical processes to make that safe-ish to burn.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was away from it. I gave them meat as an offering to my spirits. I have a pact where I'm vegetarian for all intents and purposes. I only eat meat that I myself slaughter, which is rare, obviously.
Vegetarian gang.
Vegetarian gang, yeah, outside of the context of African traditional religions that I'm involved with. But, once I had the image of Zeus to my liking, I lacquered it with nail polish to make sure it would keep. And, I waited until the Saturn hour of the Saturday that my spirits recommended. I went to a place where the grass grows, which I located ahead of time. I placated the spirits of the land, let them know, yes, I'm going to grind salt on the field. I'm sorry. Here's some offerings in advance, And then, I basically conducted a ritual as it was. I was literally white knuckling this phylactery because I have a reputation, as I mentioned in the post, of being incredibly difficult to scare. I think when Salt was first starting to flirt with me before we started dating, he would try and jump scare me with things to see how steely I was, and nothing works on me. I've watched every manner of horror movie, from gore fests to psychological horror. I don't get startled easily. I don't get scared. It's However, in this moment when I did the conjuration, I was scared. My veins were filled with ice. I couldn't move. I was just staring blindly. I felt like the intense flight or fight kind of response. And then this wasn't with my spiritual senses. This wasn't with my ability to perceive spirits with the imaginal faculties or visions. This was with my physical ears. I heard loud, slow thumping, incredibly loud footsteps, incredibly ear-piercing clattering of chains. I was shocked that this was that physical. I've seen many a physical manifestation in my life, including from my own spirits as well as other conjurations. This isn't it wasn't that it was physical that was shocking to me. It was just the degree to how physical it was in the forest at midnight, at pitch night. It was 10:30 p.m. maybe. I was just shocked by the intensity of it. I literally put the cat heart over the charcoal. I watched it roast. I added the horse manure. I gagged, the Greek sage, which made the horse manure a lot more tolerable. And the steps and the rattling kept getting louder and louder. And I saw this, a huge figure blotting out the trees, the sky. It was this titan, literally as well, right? A hooded figure. I saw a beard, sunken, elegant features and stuff like that. Very much I think I described it in the post as the musculature of an aging king. It was the wrinkles, everything was phenomenal. And this dread aura, persisted throughout. And the relationship to this in the exorcism beyond the ritual itself was that there is a part of the ritual that says essentially, say this if he appears threateningly, so that he might be subdued and speak about the things that you ask. And while he wasn't threatening me necessarily, it was clear that this was obviously I was being ballsy, as it were, with this ritual. Like, yeah, this is quite something to do to such a figure. And so I did recite it, and the tension lowered, but it was still present. Like the dread was still there. It's not that I felt I was going to be harmed. It's just that I wanted to do something about the way that the feeling of dread was clouding my perception. Because, is it going to make the way that I phrase my demand and my questions worse? And so thankfully this was effective, and I had the phylactery and everything was fine. So and the rest of the ritual went as it did. I asked my question, I got my answer, which was correct. I made my request, which occurred. I manifested pretty much immediately within the same, I would say, like hour or two. It was incredibly quickly that the manifestation occurred. So for those of you interested in this ritual, not only does it work, I can vouch for it. I have a post on it, but it is truly incredibly potent. And I followed it to the letter. Everything that the ritual says to do, from the phylactery to the ingredients, I gathered. So I definitely recommend going out of your way to do it. And if you're interested, go to like a butcher shop. Like I went to a Chinese one in Chinatown, and I asked for a suckling pig, and they said they would get it to me in a week. They didn't have it immediately. So I came back later on and got it. And yeah, absolutely worth doing. Phenomenal stuff. I was just very tickled that Salt was like, this is the one that I'm going to use in the episode. And then I'm just like, I did that one. And he was like, oh my God, you did that one. That's right.
Absent-minded boyfriend moment.
We'll make sure to, in the show notes, link that post, because it is the post that has my vote for the best on the blog.
Really?
So check that out at With Kind Command. That or Salt's post with the mathematics behind the
Paranatella. Yeah.
Yeah, those two are my favorites. So put that in the show notes, and I will also link the cell bio paper that explains how I process the cat heart.
Yes. So for our patrons, in addition to monthly Q&As and episode suggestions and the Salt's almanac of the month, as well as his order of the month, you get show notes, which include plenty of fun little gags and things that didn't make it into it, as well as all our sources and the things that we quoted. Just a little casual plug for the Patreon. But thank you, Key. I really appreciate the vote of confidence. I was very proud of that ritual, and I hope that anyone listening or reading the blog might consider doing it and then emailing me what their experiences were like, or leaving a comment, because it was a phenomenal ritual. Highly recommend. But definitely, it's you can feel that you are being testy, with the gods.
No, for real, I love hearing it. And I think I'm with Key on this one. Definitely the best post. And just the way, the sense of tension you describe, I think that's kind of what distinguishes exorcism from a lot of other forms of magic in my experience. Is even cursing in comparison, it's often a fury. With exorcism, it's this tension, this pressure, this kind of overwhelming sense of dread, or sometimes that there's less dread, but there's tension resistance almost. I really love the way that you kind of capture that in describing your experience with this ritual, just the kind of omnipresent, overhanging and overbearing, and of course Kronos as well, right? Course there's going to be that horrifying sense of primordial terror.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's his office to respond, right, to at the same time. It's not, I didn't feel like we were in a battle. Obviously, that would be completely silly. It was more in the sense that this is the way to compel the appearance, and then you make your request, and then you pray for peace between you, then you part, and you have your little "Do not smite me" talisman, which is the interesting to note, right, is that piglets, so pigs that aren't sexually mature, were a common offering to chthonic deities in the way that roosters were a common offering to celestial ones. So I think it's, you're literally using an offering to, chthonic gods, while also inscribing, the phylactery of Zeus upon it, so that it, gives the slight bit of I'm still protected by that which thwarted you once, before you continue.
Definitely. I love it. So, thus far we've really just gone over a few accounts of exorcism in Antiquity throughout a very long period of history and summarized this, and also a lot of our personal experiences. And this was less of a deep dive into the topic of exorcism. Like we said at the start, the episode is a very broad number of different cultural contexts and parts of the world, and also time periods as well, for that matter. But I think it was quite enjoyable. And part 2 is going to look at the history of exorcism within Western Christianity and the use of it in magical literature and grimoires. But I think, though, it'd be good to leave you all here, and I hope you had a great time listening today.
Thank you so much. So honestly, this was an absolute joy to hear you do it. We always benefit so much from your historical context, discussions of the very real and pervasive worldviews that are present in the magic, not just the sorceries and the spells themselves. And yeah, absolutely. I had a fucking brilliant time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, dude, thank you very much. This was such a fun episode to record, and I really appreciate your organization of all the notes for it and guiding us through this journey of telling spirits to back the fuck off.
Be gone from this place, key.
Mhm.
And with that, do we have an Akasha record of the day? Oh yeah, well actually I do. I don't know if you guys have one, but for me it was that's right. It's the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian by Peter Pringle, whom I adore.
Yes.
Not just because he's incredible, but also because of I can't get over it. So this is what like Key sends to me at 3 a.m. every Discord. But like literally he's a wizard. Go find him on YouTube. He does like original like language chants, not just Babylonian and Mesopotamian ones, but also and Sumerian ones, obviously, but liturgies and like Old English folk songs, beautiful, and on the original instruments that were used by those cultures. So yeah, check him out. That's mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really only Peter Pringle can be the subject of this episode. Like he was gonna be my suggestion for Akashic Records of the day as well. Like Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian is a piece of art. Hittite jump scares that have appeared in this episode are courtesy of Peter Pringle as
the man himself.
And he's someone else, so he will be in the show notes. Check him out.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we have our own exorcism to end off with. I'll roll it out to Key.
We do. Yes. Today's License to Depart is an excerpt from the deprecative formula that is included in the chapter Formulas of Exorcism, which are from the Roman ritual of exorcisms and certain supplications, which is the exorcistic liturgy of the Catholic Church as of 2013.
Oh, hell yeah. A little foreshadowing what's to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is the preface to the Christian exorcism episode to come later.
Mm.
And let's begin. I charge you, Satan, deceiver of the human race. Acknowledge the spirit of truth and grace, who repels your attacks and confounds your lies. Go out from N, this creature of God, whom he has signed with a seal from on high. Depart from this man, whom God, by spiritual anointing, has made a holy temple. Depart, therefore, Satan. And in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, depart from this faith and prayer of the Church. Depart through the sign of the Holy Cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns forever and ever.